Welcome all to the Rogue Valley Water Solution Summit. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Ryana Sims. I'll be your host this evening. I'm calling in from the Anderson Creek watershed here in Southern Oregon. Representing Cultivate Oregon, an organization that helps to empower responsible food and farming. And I'm also helping out with the community website partnership, and our goal is to strengthen rural communities by bringing people together through technology. That's part of why I'm joined here with my technical wizard and colleague, Stephen Williams, who's here on the call. If you need support or have any technical questions, please feel free to message him, and he can work his magic and help out. So welcome, everyone. If you would, as you join, please put your first and last name on your screen. It's really nice to all connect. Please use the chat for questions and comments. We will be following up on many of the questions that we receive in chat. So we look forward to having a lively discussion this evening. It is really helpful to remain muted unless you're ready to speak, just to cut down on background noise and so that we can really hear each of our speakers tonight. So we have a great evening planned for you. I'd love to, Stephen, if you could share the agenda. Wonderful. We've got a really great program for you this evening. We are going to be receiving a water blessing, hearing from a water blessing. We'll have a couple of important announcements. We have a really amazing guest panel this evening, and then we'll go into breakout circles where we'll have some lively discussions and really talk about solutions this evening. We'll come back to the big circle, and each group will have a chance to share out and exchange ideas, and then we'll have a closing gratitude and appreciations. So thank you for everyone who has been joining us through the different water sessions. It's really nice that all of us are here again this evening for Water Solutions number 4, focusing on veins of the valley and our waterways. I'd love to hand the mic right now to Cynthia Taylor, one of our Southern Oregon Pachamama hosts. Good evening, Cynthia. Nice to see you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ryana. And thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. As most of you know, we've dedicated the summit to Grandmother Agnes Baker Pilgrim, who always reminded us to protect our waters and to be grateful for waters. So I hope you have your precious glass of water right beside you, because you'll need it later. I invite you now to settle in and take a deep breath as we become present to one another during our conversations this evening. As we gather, it's fitting to remember and to honor the original nations who gathered in this valley before us, people who lived sustainably here for thousands of years. This acknowledgement was composed on the unceded land belonging to tribes who lived here, and to those descendants who live here still. Although some tribal names may have been forgotten, we honor and name those tribes we do know: the Takelma and the Lagawa, the Shasta, the Klamath, Modoc, and the Yahuskin. We know the ancestors of this land were abused, uprooted, and many were murdered. But their love and respect for the land, the elementals, and all the living beings here continues to bless this valley. We endeavor to learn from them and to honor and learn from their living descendants still in the Rogue Valley. Whenever possible, let us do what we can to dismantle systems of oppression that have dispossessed indigenous people of their lands while denying their rights to self-determination. Let's take it to heart, the gift of observing their practices, of working with natural systems for the benefit of everyone and everything. And now I am pleased, very pleased, to introduce our honored guest this evening, Belinda Brown. Belinda is the Tribal Partnership Director of Lomakatsi's Tribal Partnership Program and its initiatives. She works closely with Lomakatsi's Executive Director and with staff leadership to serve tribal communities in their efforts to restore forest and watersheds on tribal trust and ancestral lands. As a community liaison and eco-cultural restoration practitioner, she engages with tribal elders, tribal councils, cultural resource monitors, and tribal department staff. She promotes effective working relationships among the tribal community, Lomocotsi, and federal agency and nonprofit partners. Belinda is an enrolled member of the Koselekta Band of the Ajumawi Nation Pit River Tribe. She has served as an elected official on the Pit River Tribal Council as a traditional behavioral health specialist and currently serves as the elected Koselekta Band cultural representative. For the last 20 years, she has served Indian country in intergovernmental affairs coordination, planning, and community development. Recently, Belinda has been assisting the 109 California tribes to develop resolutions, government-to-government coordination, and workshops and collaborations for the protection and preservation of water and natural resources. Belinda, whenever you're ready to begin, please unmute yourself.
Thank you for that, and thank you everyone who's here with the passion for protecting our water. And it's a privilege and honor to be here and have this dedicated summit to Grandma Aggie. And I know that I was chuckling a little bit before this of her always telling us that we're in this leaky canoe together. So water is going to get the best of us in the end. And the other thing that she used to say that was really important to me was that the longest highway was that 12 inches from your head to your heart. And so that is the road that I'd like you all to travel tonight. And I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Belinda Brown, Tribal Partnerships Director with Lomocotsi Restoration Project and from the Koselekta Band of the Ajumawi Atsage Nation. And our name itself is the people of the river. Ajum is in our language the river, and is people. Us is water. So we are people of the river. We are people who are sustained by water that is sacred, that is life. So in our language, I'd like to welcome everybody, and that is with our language, Chimi, Sunwi, how are you? E2 to come, all my relations. And then I'd like to encourage you all as you make that journey from your head to your heart, as Grandma Aggie would say, to think about yourselves and your own indigenous cultures. You are all indigenous to some place on this earth where water is the veins of Mother Earth and where you were connected with earth, water, fire, and air. So as you drop down into that place in your heart, I'd like to sing a song. And this is a welcoming song in our language that it would be a water blessing for this evening. And just think about how we're connected. You're 80% water. Dr. Imamoto, a Japanese doctor who did many, many studies on water, encourages us to understand that we can bless water by the words that we say. So when you think of yourselves of 80% water and dust and a puff of air, but mostly water, we have the power to bless each other with the words that we speak, with the songs that we sing, and with our connection that we have with nature's natural forces that sustain us. So this song is about the children of the heart of Mother Earth and talking about the people of the river in the Indian way. And in that way that we celebrate and honor water, I'd like you all to celebrate with this song. So excuse me if my voice isn't all up to par tonight, but here it goes. They're children of the heart of Mother Earth. Mikjana hadachi tikari dati. Mikjana hadachi tikari dati. Ajumawi as isiwa itu dekam. Ajumawi as isiwa itu dekam. Mikjanawi hadachi tekari dadi. Mikjanawi hadachi tekari dadi. Ajumawi as isiwa itu dekam. Ajumawi as isiwa itu dekam. And with that song, we honor each other and we honor the sacred life forces that give us life on this earth, and just honor each other and lift each other up in the work that we do to preserve this natural life force that we are in need of preserving right now. So as we celebrate Grandma Aggie and our dedication to working and being a voice for those things that don't have a voice, like our salmon, like our water, like our air, like our earth, because it's that honor for the ancestors that went before us. And it's the honor for the generations coming that we need to preserve this earth and the natural resources for. And so saying that, we are in this leaky canoe together, and just keep our heads up and our hearts in the game as we work together and with each other. Itu to come, and you're all my relations. And in that connected Indian way, Isiwa, we're all in this together, and we are all people of the river and the water system. So thank you for your time tonight. Thank you for your dedication to this work.
Thank you, Belinda. Wow, we're so honored by your sharing, and I'm very honored by that you would share this song tonight and teach us a bit about your language. Thank you for the time that you took to share with us this evening. So grateful. Dear friends, this is really a special moment that we're here together. Oh my goodness, to be together as part of the Water Summit. And I would love to take this moment to document the Water Summit, and I would love to take your beautiful picture. So with your permission, I would love it if each of you took your camera, put your camera on, showed us your beautiful faces, to be able to take a picture of the momentous moment that we're in, sharing this time together. So I'd love to take 2 pictures because we are filling multiple screens. If you don't feel comfortable, that is totally okay. If you can just stop your camera and stop your video. But for those of you who do feel okay, we're going to count to 3 and say 1, 2, 3. And then we're going to do one more because there's so many beautiful people here. And it's 1, 2, 3, water.
Water.
Woohoo!
Water.
Thank you. I know that's, we've got to remember these moments in time with all of these beautiful people here to collaborate together. And especially as we all felt so refreshed from that water blessing in that song. So thank you for your permission there. I'm very honored to pass the mic to a dear friend and Pachamama Alliance supporter and the amazing creator of the new Southern Oregon Pachamama Alliance online auction. Belle, what do you
Online
have for us
auction,
tonight?
yes. Hi, everyone. It's been just a great privilege these last couple of weeks putting together the final touches on the Fun Fund, F-U-N-D, the Fun Fund online auction that will raise money to not only take care of some of the expenses that have incurred during this summit, but also be earmarked for future fallout from this forum of these 6 sessions. And so I invite you, it opened up today at noon, and I invite you to go to 32auctions.com / I have to look again. It's / what is it? / summit, water summit, I believe.
I
Anyway,
put it in chat.
Water solutions.
it's in the
Water
chat.
solutions.
Stephen is putting it in the chat. And he's going to go
Forward.
to that page for you to see what you will see. And there's actually 43 items that have been donated by various friends of Southern Oregon Pachamama Alliance. Items, I mean, so exciting. It's so fun. It's experiences. I mean, the first bid that came in is for an adult hula hoop lesson with Cynthia Taylor. I mean, can you imagine? And Rihanna already says that she's going to outbid everybody on Lorraine Cook's flourless chocolate cake. So I invite you all to go to this auction site. And when you get to the first page, you'll see at the top, and can you kind of point that out, Stephen, the very top right here, you'll see create an account. So all that's asking for you to do is to put in your email, and you will then be notified. I mean, basically notified if you decide to bid on something, heaven forbid. If you decide to bid on something, then they'll let you know if somebody else comes along and bids it up. And so you want to create an account, and you will then be able to just at your leisure, go through these 43 items. I had such fun putting together the copy on a lot of these. So I call this the eclectic, artistic, adventurous experience. And I really, you don't want to miss any bit of it. And you will have between now and the 11th of November, the day before our last session, to bid and create, the word reciprocity so comes up for me. It's this exchange back, for this extraordinary summit that's been put together by these 4 extraordinary women, inviting others in to support them in this conversation. And this is a way, and if you want to just go straight to donate, you can go to donate. But hey, have some fun with this. And I think that probably the items you'll be notified that you've won, and you'll be able to pay for it online. And if you can come there to our 6th session, which will be held in person at the SOU-RCC Higher Education Center in Medford, but you'll get all these directions. Anyway, we will be distributing these items or gift certificates between 9 and 10, and then again from, I believe, 2:30 to 3:30. Am I correct? So anyway, there's just, here is a beautiful sculpture by Jefferson Parson out of serpentine stone. It's just absolutely exquisite, and it's called Reciprocity. So anyway, can you tell? I'm just so excited. I just haven't ever done anything like this before. I've never done before, and I just hope you enjoy it as much as I did putting it together.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Belle. Really appreciate your support, and thank you for all of that effort. And thank you to all who donated, to all the businesses and people here who donated to help make the auction possible. Really grateful for that abundance coming in and showing your appreciation for this amazing opportunity in the Water Summit this evening. So thank you for your generosity, everyone. Appreciate that very much. All right, well, we are excited. We're going to pass the mic now to Cynthia to introduce our panelists. Hello, Cynthia.
Hello again, and I am delighted to announce this evening's guest panelists. I know many of you know them already, and we're very pleased to have them. Frances Oyoung from the Rogue Riverkeeper, Sarah Mosser from the Rogue Basin Partnership, and Eugene Weir from the Freshwater Trust. I think what we'll do is we have some questions that welcome. Thank you all for coming tonight. We really appreciate you being here, and I know you have great information to share with everyone who is attending. We have some questions, and Maybe Sarah, will you start by giving us the big picture of the basin's water?
Yeah, I can do that. That sounds great. I think we were maybe going to share a graphic, Stephen. Is that still going to happen? I think we're going to see a map of the Rogue River Basin. So the word basin, we can use the word watershed. Sometimes we use the word catchment. And what the Rogue River Basin is all of the landmass that is draining water into the Rogue River. So just to keep things really simple, so we're kind of on the same page. Oh, there it is. That gets me very excited. Look to what we're going to talk about where the Rogue River originates. So kind of look all the way to the right side of this map. And you can see that it originates somewhere called the Boundary Springs. And that's kind of at the base of Crater Lake. And it's a really neat area. You can hike there. And all of this fresh water just comes bubbling out of the ground in kind of a very small area. And then that travels all the way from that Boundary Spring area, 215 miles, all the way to, who knows, where it dumps into the ocean, all the way at Gold Beach.
Pacific Ocean.
Yep, all the way at Gold Beach. So that is the entirety, the upper, middle, and lower Rogue. And we have many drainages coming into that Rogue, that main stem of the Rogue. And we're familiar with some of those tributaries. I want to pause just for a minute because I like to point out, see this blue line that's going all the way around? That is the boundary of our basin. That's 3.3 million acres. And so that's, the entirety of the tributaries that we're going to be talking about this evening. And I like to describe it as, if there's a rain event and if drops of water are falling within that blue boundary, any water that is within that blue boundary, that is being caught by all these tributaries and draining into the Rogue River. If they fall outside of that boundary, they're going into another basin. I just wanted to point out some of like the major tributaries and subbasins that we're familiar with. We have the Illinois River, Applegate River. We're going to talk quite a bit about the Bear Creek subbasin. There's Little Butte. So and these are the Rogue Rivers running through all of our towns that we're very familiar with. So that's the general overview of the Rogue River Basin.
Might point out there too that if you're thinking about that map, we're very blessed here in that most of our river basin, more than half the land is federal lands, essentially public lands. So we've got, we've been blessed that this basin is largely public lands, especially in its headwater areas. And when you look at the headwaters of the Rogue, we're also uniquely blessed in that much of our headwater streams source from snowy ridges, high mountain, high elevation peaks from Crater Lake along the Cascades, and then the Siskiyou Crest drains into a lot of our major subbasins. So we're getting a lot of our water from cold, high elevation snowpack sources, and that's part of what makes the Rogue so uniquely resilient against many of the changes that have, been wrought upon rivers in the West. And so the Rogue is still retaining a lot of its cold water because of its source water areas and their protection.
I also wanted to mention too, because Eugene reminded me of how unique this area is. I didn't mention the wild and scenic designation sections of the Rogue, also one of the tributaries of Illinois. And it's one of the first wild and scenic designations that happened in the country in 1968. So it's really, we just live in such a unique and wildly beautiful area that really deserves the focus that we're giving it tonight and protection.
And so when we're thinking about that watershed, that basin, there's water that we're very familiar with flowing on the surface. It can be large bodies like a river, smaller like a stream, Bear Creek, Little Butte Creek, lots of small creeks that you may live by. I'm in the Lazy Creek watershed in Medford right now. And then also in the soil, there's water, and the water in the ground, in the earth, in that watershed also contributes to our overall water, because the groundwater, when it comes out in springs or it seeps out into the waterways over the year, it's all connected. So whether your drinking water is from a well or it's from a municipal water source, which is often surface water or spring water, depending on where your drinking water source is. And if you are connected to a municipal wastewater treatment plant, those wastewaters, after going through the treatment, are discharged into a waterway. Or if you're on a septic, the wastewater is going into the earth in that same watershed basin. So, Eugene, are you going to talk about Bear Creek here?
Well, I have a couple of slides that I think, if Stephen, if you want to put those up, that illustrate some of the connections, since this segment is really about waterways and wetlands. And these images kind of help you to conceptualize the layout of essentially how wetlands and waterways are sort of connected in our area. So when you look at this, you can see that, you know, in the key there, you can see the brown area is a floodplain. That's essentially the area that can potentially be inundated when all the streams are receiving runoff, when there's a good amount of water in the environment. That's the land base that could be inundated. And that's oftentimes what we also refer to as riparian areas. That's where vegetation meets freshwater, land meets freshwater. But if you look further up into these smaller tributaries that are feeding into that mainstream, you'll see green hatched and solid green patches. Those represent wetlands. And you'll see that some of them are connected by waterways. They have direct outflows that connect them to streams and rivers. Oftentimes, though, kind of what Francis was mentioning, that these are not connected by channels or waterways that we see on the surface. They're connected through pathways in the ground. The bottom line is they are all still connected, and they're all connected to the hydrologic cycle. When you look at the base of this image, you'll see an unsaturated zone and then a saturated zone. There's a lot more water below the surface than we realize. And in our area, we don't really have a water table the way they do in some valleys like the Central Valley. We have fractured rock, and water moves through lots of fractures. So it's harder to pin down exactly. It's not like there's a giant underground pool of water. The water is moving through the geology all the time, more like underground streams than an underground lake in our region. And Stephen, if you want to hit that other slide, I think that also. So this is kind of more related to what we see here, Bear Creek. If you look at this image, you'll see the water table is kind of the dotted line. It's represented underneath the ground, but you'll notice that in the depression areas, that water table surfaces. So to the right, you kind of have the water table represented coming down a slope from an upland area. There's a smaller stream course. You see that it shows some water perches there. And so that's where that groundwater is sort of emerging from the landscape, feeding into that small stream along with whatever it's conveying from runoff on the surface. Then if you look a little further down in the river section, you'll notice that there's a base level for water, but there's a high water level too. And that high water level can potentially connect up much higher, and that's the floodplain. So that sort of next level from the low water to the high water, that's the area where most riparian vegetation grows and where a lot of filtration takes place during flood events. That's a really important zone for protecting water. That's the water's insulation essentially in that area. And then if you look over to the left, you'll notice that there's like a depression wetland. And that kind of represents how wetlands form on the landscape. They tend to be pockets of water that either they catch runoff from the environment and perch it and hold it, or they are places where the subsurface water table makes it to the surface from some geological formation underneath, like shallow soils or perched rock. So the water will reach those wetland areas and sort of emerge. Wetlands tend to be shallow. They can be year-round or seasonal, but they tend to not be deep like lakes. There's a lot of biological activity happening there. If you think about it kind of in terms of the human body, we mentioned that earlier. I think Belinda said that our streams are like they're veins. They're the arteries and the veins of water. They're the pathways that water follows when it's going somewhere. Wetlands are kind of more like the kidneys. They're the place where a lot of filtration is happening. There's also storage happening there that helps store water in the upland areas, and it'll slowly release it down to those streams to kind of help support the flow of the stream. But also they create these refuges for wildlife, And when floodplains, become inundated, plants and animals can take refuge in some of those wetland areas. They can re-migrate back into the stream and avoid the disturbance of floods. So wetlands are playing a bunch of different roles as well. And when you look at this image, this is pretty much how most of our floodplains in the valleys look. As you move higher into our watersheds, they're much steeper streams and there's less floodplain. But for most of like Bear Creek or the main stem rogue, this is kind of the layout we're looking at. Uplands dropping down into various terraces that are formed over many flood events over many years. And then eventually, you're reaching down into that lowest point where you look at the bottom of the river, and hopefully that is engaged with that water table so that it's getting water subsurface, helping to feed into it even in the lowest water times a year.
So maybe I'll cover those points, Eugene and Sarah, about the importance of the connections of these waterways. So when you come away from what we're talking about here, I want you to really, you in the audience, to think about the times that you see water on the landscape in the Rogue Basin, and to really understand that it's connected to a whole bunch of more water that maybe you can't see, but is still an important part of our water resources. And so some of the important things that happen is in the ground, when there's groundwater, that water is staying cold, basically. It's more thermally controlled. It's not affected by the heat of the sun and any activities on the surface of the earth. And when it does exit the earth in seeps or springs or wetlands, that's a source of cold water that is then joining those larger water bodies. And we have a lot of organisms in our waterways that are dependent on cold water. And so having that fully functioning palette or array of water sources helps protect all the organisms. So cold water can come from those groundwater sources, and then they can also be places that animals can find refuge in, because sometimes when in the middle of the summer, and especially in places like Bear Creek, the sun can really beat down in places where there's not enough shade in the streamside vegetation. One of the biggest forms of pollution in the urbanized streams of the Rogue Basin is just heat from the sun, because that is very damaging to a lot of the organisms that need cold water. So those riparian areas, those streamside vegetation that are often characterized by trees and have a lot of diversity no matter where on earth you are, those streamside riparian areas or lakeside provide an important service, because not only are they shading, but they're also, their roots are holding the soil and protecting or holding it back from erosion. They're also increasing the sponge-like function of that soil. So when we're talking about that water in the soil, those riparian areas really help improve that sponge-like function, and as well as filtering. So when things are surface, when it's raining and it's running off the surface to join the waterway, if it's not soaking into the ground, those riparian areas help do some important filtration and keep out whatever might be running off the surface, whether it's soil or pollutants, different substances which are not necessarily, you don't want getting right in a waterway. Let's see. More?
I was just going to mention that I think oftentimes, and this kind of leads into the next question, but when we're talking about restoration, we're often doing, and my organization is not directly doing this, but is often doing the restoration work in the riparian area. So we are going to continue to talk about that word and what's happening in the riparian zone further into this evening. And I also, to me, it's always of interest that when we're looking at that riparian area and those floodplains, the floodplain is this area that's kind of flatter, and it's becomes very attractive for development. And so that's kind of always what we're working and trying to find balance between is where humans want to be and to be, building things, and what we are all doing in our work and trying to conserve and preserve those areas to keep them in a natural vegetated state.
Thank you. Thank you. Wow, that was a lot of great information in a short amount of time there. I appreciate you all giving us what is really volumes of information, and you've really illustrated the importance of the connection of all these different types of water, and also our role possibly as human beings, and how we impact the water systems that is right beneath our feet sometimes, and we're kind of oblivious to it. So that kind of brings us to the next question. If you could tell us who in the Valley is working on the protection and restoration of waterways and wetlands, and how can we support those efforts? And Francis, do you want to lead off on this one?
Sure, I can lead off. And I think, Eugene and Sarah, this might be a good time also for us to just talk about our respective organizations, as we're going to talk about others as well. So Rogue River Keeper is a program of Klamasiski Wildland Center. I usually say we handle the water aspect while they do a lot of the uplands and forest and wildlife issues. Rogue River Keeper is part of KS Wild, or Klamasiski Wildland Center. We handle water, and so myself as program director and Emily Bowes, who is the conservation director, the mission of our program is to protect and restore clean water, native fish, and healthy communities in the Rogue Basin. And we do it very explicitly through advocacy, accountability, and community engagement. So we also fundraise independently of KS Wild. So if you go to my website, our website, Rogue River Keeper, you can find a lot about the work we do. And you can also contribute to the work that Emily and I do specifically on water. So Rogue River Keeper, we as advocates for the river, we actually do not do on the ground restoration, but as advocates, we support by working in collaboration and sharing the work and promoting the work of a lot of other organizations in the Rogue Basin, and particularly in Bear Creek, because Bear Creek is the most populated sub-basin of the Rogue Basin. So when you think of Grants Pass, well, Medford and that part of Jackson County, the Bear Creek Valley, there's a lot more people in Bear Creek's watershed than in Grants Pass. So in terms of impact on the Rogue Basin, Bear Creek, while being a small creek, it is heavily impacted by humans and human activity. So a lot of us tend to work a lot there, and Sarah and Eugene and I are going to be talking a lot about that, because a lot of, I think, the people that I'm talking to now in this audience are probably living in the Bear Creek watershed as well. So the three of us work, and I guess I'll just dive in, that we are part of a collaborative kind of ad hoc group called the Bear Creek Restoration Initiative. And I'm tired of talking. I think I'm going to hand it off to one of you guys now.
Jump in there.
Talk about your organization too.
Yeah, so the Freshwater Trust originally was Oregon Trout, which was 30 years ago, the Pacific Northwest's first wildfish advocacy group. And we did education and advocacy. We lobbied for policy to protect wild fish. But after a while, we realized that a lot of other organizations were moving into that realm and doing good advocacy. What was missing was bringing the work to the ground, making things happen, and increasing the pace and scale of actual restoration work. So Oregon Trout combined with the nation's first water trust, and we became the Freshwater Trust. So we began doing in-stream flow work, mostly in Northern Oregon in the Columbia Basin, where we're purchasing flow, working with farmers to get that water back in stream when they're not using it and when it's surplus from their agricultural activities. And we focus really now on designing programs that drive sustained investment into freshwater resources and restoring them. And so an example of that is the work I do here. We have several programs with water quality trading, they're called. They're essentially ways that cities like the city of Medford can invest in watershed restoration that also meets their compliance obligations for their facilities like their treatment plant. So instead of building a big cooling tower to cool the water off for the couple of weeks a year when they need it, we can plant trees and do a better job of that at a lower cost, and that has a whole bunch of ancillary benefits to fresh water and to wildlife. So that's a lot of the work we do. And in order to do that work, we can't do it alone. We need private landowners. We need, agency support. We need the clients that we work with to buy into these programs and invest in them as solutions. But even more so, we need the partners that we work with here in this basin. And we're really lucky and blessed here in the Rogue that there are a lot of active nonprofits and other partners that are doing similar work that's complementary. And so Francis mentioned the Bear Creek Restoration Initiative. That is a collaboration of folks, a bunch of different nonprofits working here in the Bear Creek Basin. A greater collaboration we have is Rogue Basin Partnership, which Sarah is representing, and that is over 20 environmental organizations working basin-wide all the way out to the ocean, across the entire basin, trying to become more strategic and coordinated in our restoration work, focusing on the key cold water tributaries in the Rogue that are likely to sustain our cold water ecosystem into the future against climate change. And so we have a strategic plan, and maybe we'll have time to get more into that later, but the work we're doing really depends on collaboration. I was out at Bear Creek today with some of the Bear Creek Restoration Initiative partners. We were looking at how to strategically restore Bear Creek, both in the burn areas as well as the non-burned areas. And we're out there mashing ideas, working with EPA, working with DEQ, the agencies are there. And we're coming up with ideas of how to select the places that need the most protection for the water resources, while also restoring places that people can use to visit the water, and trying to be more holistic. In the Bear Creek BCRI group, the Restoration Initiative, we're really focused on taking a holistic look. And that's what's neat about it. It's a little different than most of the watershed restoration work that's happened in the Rogue historically, because we're taking in fire, we're talking to, various partners in the community that deal with unhoused populations. So social services is being brought into the mix. And we're trying to figure out where the overlap and, the benefits are for multiple, that we can be stacked for multiple benefit in our community. So we're not just fixing the water for fish, we're doing it for people in this community, and we're doing it in a way that's going to be holistic. And so it's a really neat collaboration. We're very blessed to have active people like yourselves who are interested in water. And we've transformed Bear Creek from being one of Oregon's most polluted water bodies to one of its most recovered water bodies in the last couple decades. And I think we can all be really proud of that. Like, that's a direct outcome from our collaboration here in this basin. So I'm really stoked on the things we're doing here. Bear Creek has a long ways to go, and it has plenty of problems, but it actually represents one of the best stories in the nation of a urban water body that's been restored to higher function. And it is Southwest Oregon's most urbanized water body. More people live in the Bear Creek watershed than in the rest of the Rogue Basin, essentially. So I'll pass it to Sarah.
Yeah, I'll just mention that we continue to formalize that network, the Bear Creek Restoration Initiative, and we have a new website. It's called bearcreekrestoration.org. We're pretty excited about, for the first time, really getting all of the collective work that we've all been working on for many years out there, so folks can see what we've been up to. So visit that website. I'll just take a few more minutes to talk about Rogue Basin Partnership specifically. I'm the executive director for Rogue Basin Partnership, and there is a reason that many of you have probably never heard of Rogue Basin Partnership. We are not really a community facing organization. Very purposefully, we don't do a lot of public engagement, because what the Rogue Basin Partnership was formed to do was to work and collaborate with all the other natural resource organizations in the Rogue River Basin. And so my job is to know a little bit about what the various sectors, the natural resource organizations are doing here, and see how I can support them either through capacity or doing some joint fundraising. But I really like this question because it touches on my perspective of the basin, is to really see this conservation work as not only wetlands and waterways, but how everything is connected. So I work with organizations like Francis was saying, from Lower Rogue all the way to Upper Rogue, that are working in like vegetation restoration, like Eugene's organization, Freshwater Trust, Loma Katsi, working with water advocates like Rogue River Keeper, but also working with folks that are working in stream, doing fish barrier and fish barrier removal and fish passage. We work with people that are doing weed management. So we have two, Jackson County and Josephine County have a cooperative weed management area. So that's a whole other kind of the other side of the coin to vegetation restoration. We have to look at what weed management is also doing in those areas to, you know, make sure that we have a successful program at the end of the day. And then, so we also work in education, like Salmon Watch. We work in, in wildlife conservation. So with folks like Klamath Bird Observatory and the Beaver Coalition. So if you go to Rogue Basin Partnership, it's roguebasinpartnership.org, pretty easy, and click on our member organizations. We are a member-based organization, but the members happen to be the organizations that are doing all the work in the basin. So check us out there.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Did someone else have something they wanted to add on that one? If not, then
Cynthia, did you want to, at some point, did you want to cover how the public can support the protection of waterways, wetlands at some point, or how are we going to do that? Or we're going to the next question, question 3.
Well, we're on question 4 now. We talked about, we covered that question before, but we can circle back to that because I think that's a great question, and people on this call right now want to know that. Why don't we go ahead and let's talk about the key actions, engagement, and the solutions for healthy wetlands and waterways. Who wants to go first on that question?
I'll start with that. So what Sarah and Eugene and I, we talked before we came on here. We've talked in a while, and we wanted to emphasize that the protection of water resources happens on many, many fronts. Yes, on the ground restoration and vegetation and riparian management and restoration is part of it. But there are other ways to protect wetlands and waterways, including through regulations or variant city regulations, county, state. I mean, that is environmental laws in the United States with the Clean Water Act, which is 50 years old this year. That attitude of trying to protect these resources has filtered all the way down the multiple levels of government. And so using the structures of government to help protect is one of the ways also that we can help do that. And it also takes citizens being involved in understanding and observing and engaging with planning commissions, city councils, different county commissions and state agencies, whether it's the Oregon Marine Board or the Department of Fish and Wildlife or the Board of Forestry, Department of Forestry. So I was going to put a plug in for that, and you guys, Sarah and Eugene, make some more plugs for how people can get involved.
Well, I would say there's all levels of involvement. The first level of involvement starts with your own home. What can you do to conserve water in your own home and around your landscape? Plant native, go drought resistant, abandon your lawn whenever you can. Think about using less water. The less water we use, the more water there is available, both for others and as well as for the environment. Advocacy, big piece of it. Advocate for, one of the things we really need in Bear Creek in particular, but in all of our streams, are protected base flows. So a minimum standard, basically, the stream is guaranteed to have some water left in it. We won't take it all. And in Bear Creek's case, the water rights for the irrigation districts are larger than the volume that's available in Bear Creek. So if they all took their allotment, they could completely dry up Bear Creek. They try not to, but Bear Creek's very vulnerable because of that. And it's not alone. Other streams are like that too. It is possible to establish state minimum standards for flow in these streams. So we need to advocate as public to agencies like ODFW and Water Resources that we really want that. We want base flow for these streams that's protected. Advocacy, riparian vegetation is the most important thing for these streams. It's the most important thing we can do to protect our streams. There's a really encouraging paper came out in 2019, Wenzel and others, Journal of American Water Resources, basically exploring what are the best ways to preserve cold water refugia in streams to keep our streams cold. They looked at adding flow, they looked at in-stream changes, and they looked at riparian vegetation. Clearly, riparian vegetation wins out over all the other options. It is the one and most important thing we can do. We need to keep insulation on our streams. And the really encouraging thing about that paper was that they realized through the modeling work that if we did a good job of strategically restoring riparian vegetation in the places where solar load is the highest on our streams, that not only will our streams improve today, but in 30 years, they will be colder than they are today, even under the most aggressive climate change scenarios that are modeled. So that is a really powerful and positive piece of information that we have to take forward with us, every one of us, to do something about preserving, protecting, and enhancing these riparian forests along our streams. So we can do that here by noticing when people are clearing vegetation and calling and saying, hey, is there a riparian permit for that? We can continue to advocate to planning into our counties, and particularly Josephine County has got a little ways to go in terms of riparian protections. Jackson County is doing a pretty good job, but they have to establish code and they have to enforce it, that permits are needed if you're going to remove riparian vegetation. So that way we can ensure that something good is going back in there, even if we're removing weeds. Advocate for the protection of riparian areas, get involved as a volunteer, go out and work with one of our organizations when we're doing planting work and we're out there restoring these places. Advocate for agricultural buffers. Again, this goes back to riparian areas, but a lot of the pollution that we're dealing with in our waterways comes as runoff from farms and agricultural activities. It's not that these folks are intentionally fouling our waterways. It's just the systems that worked 150 years ago or 100 years ago don't work now, and they can be a lot better. So we need to keep advocating. That's ODA, that's the Department of Agriculture. Hey, ODA, we really want you to keep working on buffers on farms, keep working with farmers to change practices so that the irrigation water isn't running off. And if it is, let's establish pocket wetlands to treat it before it gets into our waterways. Get involved in citizen monitoring, citizen science. This is something that is really important. People, it's our eyes, it's our awareness that connects us to the environment and helps us to notice what it needs. So look, listen, feel it, get out there and pay attention and monitor what's happening in this world. And if you see something that doesn't feel right or that just seems wrong, talk to people about it, because a lot of things just go untouched or unaddressed because nobody ever decides to take initiative and say, hey, you know what, I see a problem there, and who else sees this? So keep looking and then support organizations that do land conservation. The Rogue Basin Partnership's a great organization that works with a whole bunch of organizations and tries to strategically align them so that we can be really effective with our work. But organizations like Southern Oregon Land Conservancy do really important work in conserving source waters in Jackson County, Josephine County, and beyond in Southern Oregon. So, supporting organizations that do land conservation, really important, because we are blessed with our federal forest lands. And even when they're functioning well and delivering water that's clean coming off of it, most of our water degradation actually happens in our lowland valleys, where we're in private lands, agricultural lands, and urban landscapes. That's where most of the degradation happens. So that's where we all live, and that's where we conduct our lives. So it gives us power to change things in that environment that can really have positive results for our waterways.
Thank you so much.
We're getting to our end of our time.
Yes, thank you so much, panelists.
I have a question for Eugene. I have a question for Eugene. I've worked a little bit with Lomakatsi, but what are some other hands-on teams that I could volunteer to help with as far as riparian vegetation restoration?
Yeah, Lomakatsi a great organization that's out there doing a lot of this work, and they're really good at engaging volunteers. RVCOG, the Rogue Valley Council of Governments, also executes on stream restoration work and sometimes coordinates volunteer work associated with that. But really, the Rogue River Watershed Council is probably one of the best organizations to connect with if you want to get involved with voluntary management and work in riparian restoration projects. They also, like us, are involved in delivering that work. And we've kind of divided Bear Creek up into segments where Freshwater Trust is working a lot in the upper basin right now, from Ashland down through to about Phoenix. Watershed Council is working a lot with Phoenix and on down through to the lower end of Bear Creek. So depending on where you live, there's opportunities there. A lot of our work, we hire professional contractors to do because it's really hard, but we love to bring in the public to visit our sites, learn about them. And there's definitely a lot of accentuating that can happen. In particular, we're adding a lot more pollinator habitat into these projects. And that's something that we can really use volunteers to help out with. So, reach out to us, and Rogue Basin Partnership has a direct line to 20 organizations. Many of them would love to have your volunteer help. So that's another route to go.
We'll try to compile some of this information and get this out to our participants as well. We need to thank you, panelists, and just to let everybody know, our panelists will be in our circles, and we'll have more time to speak with them in your individual breakout circles. And hopefully we'll have a little bit of time at the end. And if not, if you have questions, put them in the chat and we will get those answers for you.
All right, welcome back. Thank you all for really great conversations in the breakout circles tonight. I know that it feels like we never have enough time. These topics are so dense and there's so much to share. So thank you all for participating in those conversations. Welcome back. We want to have a report from each group. I know there are a lot of really great conversations going on. And so if we can just hear from one person in your group and give us a little overview of some of the highlights of what was shared in your session. And scribes, if you could please make sure to put your notes or your report there in the Google Doc that we put in the chat earlier. That way we can continue to create a really great legacy from these conversations. So is there anyone from group one who is willing to share a little overview of
Yeah, this is Paul Sheldon. I was the scribe.
Hello, Paul.
Howdy. And special thanks to Delcy Tibbetts, who facilitated our group. We had Larry Cooper and Kathleen Allen and Lauren Oliver with us also. Delcy started out by talking about using rainwater, not just so much out of the surface flows or the wells, and also reusing gray water and everyday water. Every little bit helps. Larry chimed in with, this is an area that he has a lot of experience in, basically water conservation for urban dwellers, and using rainwater and reusing everyday water contributes almost nothing, although it does affect habits and create a way to be mindful about our water use. And he noted that when he noticed how it affected his way of thinking about water, he realized that that's another valuable thing. Even though residential conservation might not save a huge volume of water, it helps us become aware of our habits. And also, he said with residential use, it really comes down to getting rid of lawns and maybe having a little patch of grass for the dog, but allowing the lawn to go brown in the summer. Delcy contributed or asked, if you eliminate your lawn, what else do you put there? And we talked about drought tolerant plants and native plants and deer resistant plants and that sort of thing, and putting wood chips down, not bark, not near the building or near flammable fences, but wood chips have been used very effectively in Lithia Park and other places around Ashland. Paul talked about conservation being freezing in the dark or dying of thirst, that we really need to think about efficiency and elegance and having fun and doing things that are inspiring and not just austerity. Lauren came in with a story about visiting the Hopi, who grow blue corn with almost no water, or what looks like no water. And so we really need to look at crops that are grown in the valley. Since so much of our use is agricultural, how do we shift crops so that what we're growing is for human consumption primarily, not necessarily intermediate feed for animals? And talked about Chris Hardy's work with different kinds of wheats and barleys and grains from all around the world that can be grown with no additional unnatural water. And she also talked about large-scale gray water and effluent systems, getting those set up to be able to water golf courses and parks and public places. Kathleen contributed a perspective of the sacred aspects of water, that we think in terms of popularized simplicity and acknowledging ourselves as a drop in a cosmic ocean of consciousness, and talked about people in Tibet and how more in tune they are with the natural systems. And we also talked about media and the importance of using messaging to reach out through the media. Get back to things like glass milk bottles were better than plastic bottles. Plastic bottles use a huge amount of water, and they steal a huge amount of water from public systems to put into those plastic bottles. And then we ran out of time, but we had a wonderful time.
Great, Paul. Thank you for that very thorough report. You had a lively discussion, and really appreciate so much of what was shared there. Thank you, group number one. All right, we've got group two. Who is willing to share on behalf of group two, please?
I took the notes, but does anyone else want to just report out? Or would that be me too?
That'd be great if you'd report out, if you got all those notes.
All right. Well, we talked about a lot of things. Let me find those notes. Okay. Well, Christina Lefevre was in our group, and so she talked a bit on the importance of native plants and making sure that we make space in our built environments to establish those and maintain them where they exist already. Talked about the importance of riparian areas for pollinators and biodiversity in general, and just the fact that development tends not to benefit waterways or natural plant systems and all the biodiversity that goes with that. But we talked about how ways, if we have our own property, we can do things like that by how we plant and manage our own properties or where we live, or we can join up in public spaces where work is needing to be done. Talked about riparian areas and the value of keeping the streams cool with either shading or making sure that we try and infiltrate water. And so we talked a little about rain gardens, and I put a link in the chat. So you should all be able to see it, which is a good publication, a good basic publication about that. But rain gardens are something that kind of depends on one's site and the soils and the space involved and all that. But it's a nice way to try and connect to the water that falls on our property and allow it to soak in. So that's both in the notes and in the chat. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate everyone in the group. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, group two. That was about ecosystems and wetlands and waterways. Next, we've got group three, the urban impacts on wetlands and waterways. Anyone want to share on behalf of group three, please?
Okay, I can. This is Flavia.
Hi, Flavia.
Hi. And so there were good questions to start off with. Wendell made the observation that as we improve our valley, in terms of restorations and making it beautiful and sustainable and everything, it will drive the prices up, making our, which doesn't help our housing crisis. And those profits are privatized. So if my home value goes up because of the work that everybody else is doing to make this valley better, the profits stay with me. They don't get publicized. So it's just an observation about social justice. And when I was listening to Paul Sheldon talk about we need to get rid of our lawns, I was in a very swanky area of Medford this weekend. And man, oh man, do they love their acreage covered with lawns. So we also talked about, Helga was concerned with, in Medford, you drive around and you see all these parking lots and all these rooftops, and how there's very little surface area that isn't, covered with cement or something else so that the water won't sink in. So it goes directly into our stream. So we might have more flooding events as a result. And I think I did hear that there's an Oregon Department of Land and Development Conservation, and I think that they are changing. They're making more climate-friendly regulations and decreasing the requirement that every new building have so many parking spaces, because they're trying to influence people to be more use other transit methods other than cars, and so having the spokesperson from the sewer system, the main sewer system, was really helpful, because they were informing us how, what concerns from the sewage treatment plant perspective, what concerns do they look out for? And they do have more oversight towards construction areas. And they are aware that the toxins coming out off of the tires from car tires are toxic to coho salmon. And so a lot of these things, they're looking at and trying to minimize. And they did talk about, there's a separate sewage treatment plant in Gold Hill and also in Shady Cove, but they're taking over Shady Cove. And I think with Gold Hill, it was, there is still kind of a rebellion, and there's probably going to be a lawsuit if they don't buckle down and get more in compliance with the way they're treating their sewage in that area. So yeah, that was a pretty good session.
Great. Thank you, session group 3, and the urban impacts of wetlands and waterways. Great. Next we have group 4, restorations after the Alameda fire. Would anybody from group 4 like to share about our conversation?
I don't mind stepping in there unless you want to. Rihanna, you have the notes.
Yeah, Eugene, go ahead. That's great.
Well, we talked about, our subject was Alameda fire restoration area, and we talked mostly about the reach in Phoenix because our folks in this breakout were from around Phoenix. We talked a little bit about retaining snags and the value of doing that, along with the trade-offs, in terms of the visual, the reminder of the fire and things that they are, and the safety concerns sometimes. But they're also great wildlife habitat. We talked a bit about herbicide use along Bear Creek as part of the strategy for recovering it post-fire and moving it back towards a native plant community, and kind of explored some of the ups and downs of that. Talked a little bit about different regulations the communities have put in place to try and manage pesticide use in their communities, and how does this approach on the Greenway fit in with that. We also talked a little bit about beavers and how when the fire happened, they moved out of the Bear Creek corridor and sometimes into places like storm drain facilities and wetlands that they backed up, and they suddenly became a lot more noticeable to the public. But how those places, again, the value of having wetlands adjacent to our stream courses is that they become refuges for animals like beavers. When there's a wipeout in the stream, either a flood or a fire like we experienced, they can move into those off-channel areas, take refuge for a year or two, and then move back into the environment as it recovers. So they play really important roles, even right in the center of our cities like Phoenix, right between our highways. Did I miss anything?
Great. Thank you, Eugene. That was really helpful. And I will say that in group 4, we did have, a bit of a back and forth around the use of herbicide as a tool in restoration work around riparian corridors and other places. And I just really want to acknowledge the strength of our group here tonight, that we were able to strongly disagree and stay civil and stay connected and appreciative of the work that each of us are doing, and to have strong opposing viewpoints, but that are really coming together for a common purpose. And so just really appreciate your work, Eugene, and the Freshwater Trust, and just also appreciate those who have worked to eliminate herbicides in our parks, playgrounds, and green spaces. So I know that all of us are here trying to find solutions to work together, and that's really what this summit is about. And so my heart is just full that we could have a difficult conversation and move through with civility, and really continue to honor and appreciate the community that we're all a part of. So thank you so much to Group 4 for that moment and that experience there. Really, that really struck a chord with me tonight. So thank you for this moment together. We're excited to hear from Group 5 about shared interests for wetlands, waterways, and agriculture. Would anybody from Group 5 like to share?
I can go for it, if that sounds good.
Thanks, Stacey. Hello.
Yeah, hello. Our group talked about wetlands, waterways, and ag, and had a lot of expertise in our group with John Gardner, Elise with Oshala Farms, Chris Hall, Gordon Lyford, Carol. And we spent a lot of time kind of giving a little bit of background and some overarching thoughts. And K-Roll really kicked us off with, how do we solve these agriculture, water quality, water use challenges, particularly here in the Rogue? And we spent a little bit of time about, well, what are those threats and concerns? And then Elise spoke about her experience as a small farmer and, the importance of supporting food farmers and organic farmers, and really folks on the ground who are directly impacted, maybe not even able to farm because they didn't get access to water this year. Chris added some great stats, which I need to write down your numbers. They were great about just how, it's really not those small family farmers, those folks in the community, part of the community on the landscape that are really using a ton of this water. It's, I think you had a great stat about ag is $5 billion of our economy here in Oregon, and 4 out of 5 of those $1 billion is managed and run by about 5% of farmers. And so to me, that's also a lot of opportunity about where we can maybe start thinking about changing regulations and policies and practices for those really big users that then, create more access, more water, more support during drought for the rest of the smaller farmers, particularly here in the Rogue. Did I miss anything, Group 5, that you want to add?
I think I have one question. Thanks for jumping in, Stacey, because I was about to do it, but I had to unmute and beat me to it. I think the point was raised about how to treat irrigation ditches by Elise from Oshala. She said she sees trees dying along irrigation ditches, and what thoughts on covering these ditches. This is a very important issue our way, because we're trying to, in many cases, recover from having irrigation ditches that obviously evaporate a lot of water and so on, and from which it's very easy to steal water. So that's a question that's worth pursuing, but it's a very small one in the overall issue. Thanks. Oh, and I should thank my wife for taking the notes for me. Thank you, Christine.
Lise, did you have anything that you wanted to share? I saw you came off mute.
Oh, I just was going to say the stats on cannabis too, of course, got brought up. Just about, the whole issue of not necessarily all legal grows happening, and just, water rights and regulating all of that, having a huge impact, especially in the valley. So, it was not enough time to talk about with all of us. So.
Thank you for adding that piece. Thank you, Group 5. Really appreciate your input and thoughtfulness there. Next, we've got Group 6, naming and knowing, and a conversation about the rights of nature. Anyone from Group 6 like to share?
Absolutely. I'm really grateful for our group and for the time that we took at the beginning of our session to talk about each of our day using water descriptives. And so someone talked about feeling like a swan floating on top of the water, and someone else talked about feeling like a boulder that was getting moved by the water. And so we already started to talk about connection and relationship to water before we even got into our main subject matter. And then I brought the question and opened the space of what naming does in creating channels of knowing and connection to water, to different kinds of bodies of water. And within our discussion, we talked about how naming is a way of endearing, and how we are motivated to be protective and to conserve water from a place of love, that it's much more sustainable to work on these issues if we feel a love connection to where it is that we're trying to conserve. And then getting into more of the particulars of naming, there are a lot of places around here that were named by settlers. And actually the names before the settlers came through had much more connection to the geographic features and the stories and the origins of connection to those places. And so someone talked about Robin Kimmer, who wrote Braiding Sweetgrass, and one of the components in that book is about how we so often in the way that we use the English language relate to place through noun instead of relating in a more familiar way or a more relational way. And so thinking about relation to water as water being a being and something that isn't a thing, but a connection. And Dan really highlighted and talked about relation in amazing quandary of like, what is Dan? Call me brother, call me uncle, call me nephew, call me a relational term instead of just my name. And so we went from the idea of naming as knowing to thinking about the relational aspects and really diving deep into how we relate to water, how the names of a name of water creates or disconnects us from that body of water. And it was a really excellent discussion. If anyone from our group would like to add anything, please do.
Rich.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for that sharing in that moment. I was totally captivated and with you the whole time. Thank you for sharing. That was really beautiful. We do have a bit more time for other shares. If there's anyone else who would like to take a moment to share a thought or idea that hasn't been mentioned, or want to make sure that all voices are invited here, as we've got just a couple more minutes. Would anybody else like to come off mute and share a bit?
I would like to share the notion of equity, water equity, that, imagine if, and it's already being done in some quarters, we could control the rain and say, well, only the people that have farmed the longest are entitled to rain. Well, think about it. That would mean that the indigenous people ought to get the rain then. So maybe if we did that with the water, then the tribal people, the indigenous people, ought to get more of the water rather than the more recent pioneers who came in and said, "Oh well, we deserve water rights." And it just seems wrong to me that this whole business of water rights based on, I don't know, I get emotional talking about it, but I think you know where I'm going. And the river seems to know how to share its water. And why can't we share it with everybody and not exclusively entitle certain groups of people based on how long they've been farming or whatever? Okay, off my horse. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff, for sharing. Appreciate you bringing that forward. Yeah, Christopher, I see your hands up.
I just got to echo what Jeff is just saying. We've come a long way in the last 150 years in some aspects. And there are injustices that we've moved past, many we haven't moved past. And one of the injustices we have not moved past, as Jeff so eloquently put, is that some people are more entitled to the rainwater than others simply because they got first in line. It is a juvenile, and it is an archaic, and it is an inequitable system to decide who gets to use the water and how that water is getting used. And even the language of using the term use and using the language of water resource, seeing the water as a resource, these are problematic terms that are very troubling to me. And what I think, what we really need to do is put beneficial use, which is the law, where it belongs, legally where it belongs, which is the number one priority in terms of like how we decide if the water is going to get used. Is it a beneficial use to the public? And when we mean to the public, what we really mean is to what the public cares about. Like, I care about the flora, I care about the fauna, I care about the watersheds, and once we've identified if the water is, if it's beneficent as to how the water is being used, and the way Bella Witherspoon was speaking, who could speak more eloquently than Bella did about the beneficence of water and what it means to not other water and to realize that we are water. And so this idea that we can just fight like school children for the front of the line and who gets what they want with it is, the time has come and the time has passed for that. And I'm working all day long on this issue, and I would love for people to join us on that. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Christopher.
Thank you.
Appreciate your sharing. Looks like we've got time for one more. Hi, Kay Allen. Hello.
Yeah. Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, yeah, just briefly, how we depend on and abuse water externally to generate the energy that we ourselves are. We are energy powerhouses. We are, the fluid in our body is generating, between that and the mitochondria, we have so much energy coursing through our bodies. If we can learn to direct our attention and awareness towards how to implement that energy, we don't have to try to control nature or compete and vie for who has access to water. We all have access to water. As our friend Christopher just said, we are water. So just that, and I put a little something in the chat. There's a movie called The Need to Grow. And you might want to take a look at that as to how those people generate energy using to grow. Just check it out. I put the link in the chat, and it's well worth watching on that same note. Okay, sorry, but thank you for everyone for all these wonderful contributions to this conversation. It's really delightful. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks for sharing. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for the really great report outs from each of the breakout rooms and for all of the sharing here. I am going to pass the mic over to Cynthia now for a couple of announcements. Please stay with us. We have some other great announcements to share that you won't want to miss. Cynthia, hello.
Hi. Thank you, everyone. Wow, so much going on. I hope we can capture all of this and get back to you with questions and with answers to your questions. But we wanted to thank the people who have donated to the summit. Thank you so much. You're helping keep the water summit flowing. If you would like to make a donation, but you don't know how, Stephen is putting a link in the chat now. Thank you, Peace House, for acting as our physical agent and enabling all of these donations to be tax deductible. We also want to remind you of what Belle spoke of at the beginning. Don't forget, we have another fun way to help us offset summit costs, our fabulous, artistic, eclectic, adventurous online auction. And
Cynthia froze, but we know that what she's trying to talk about is that there are some really great items on the online auction to support the Southern Oregon Pachamama Alliance and our water summit. There's original art, there's experiences, jewelry, again, a fantastic flourless cake. So please do check out the auction, and all of the proceeds go to support the Water Solutions Summit here. Let's see, there's Cynthia coming back in the door. Okay, let's see if we can get Cynthia back for a moment. Cynthia, do you hear us again? Okay, well, Cynthia's gonna be.
Okay, I'm back.
All right, Cynthia, welcome.
I don't know what happened. It's like I said, I'm in Kansas, so anything can happen.
Okay,
I was just about finished. I think Stephen, were you able to put the address to Katie's art show in the chat? If you can, that would be great. Otherwise, we'll send you the information. And that's it for our announcements. Rihanna, if you want to go ahead and continue on with what's coming up.
Great. So I did just want to make sure that everyone did hear that there will be a special art show, Shadow and Spirit art show put on by Katie Farrell, and the address there in the chat for the Gambro Gallery. She'll be in the gallery from 4 to 7 p.m. with originals and greeting to cards. It's this Saturday. And that's another way to support the Water Solutions Summit. So please come check out that beautiful gallery there. It's this Saturday. And so please come down and join us. Great. So what's coming next? Thank you, Stephen. What's coming next? We've got a catch basin, a flood of issues, and possibilities. So please do join us again in 2 weeks on November 9th from 6 to 8 p.m. We're going to be talking about how locally here, how we can avert mistakes and disasters and learn from those that have already occurred. So please do tune back in on November 9th, 6 p.m. What's coming up next to stay in the flow? Stephen, if you can, there we go. We've got, we want to make sure that November 12th is on your calendar. So that's a Saturday, November 12th from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. And this is a really critical piece where we're saying, where do we go from here? We've read the background information. We've listened to some of our content experts. We've had conversations with our peers and neighbors and new friends. Where do we go from here? Let's put our ideas into action. So this is going to be an in-person event where we'll have a summary, but also there's a lot of motivation from folks in the group to write some grants, to collaborate, to really push some of these ideas forward. This is a Water Solutions Summit. This is not just for information. This is also for action. And so we want to make sure that you are part of determining the direction of that action on Saturday, November 12th. Yeah, go ahead, Belle.
Oh, I was just gonna say, bring a bag lunch. We'll have coffee and tea at that 9 to 3. But bring what you'd like to nourish yourself with, and we'll have water.
Great. Thank you. Maybe Lorraine's going to bring that cake and we're going to enjoy that cake. All right. So make sure that November 12th is on your calendar. Please, as you know and have seen over the course of these water summits where we've been together, that we take your feedback very seriously. We make changes and adapt based on what your feedback is and your input. So please do click the link in the chat for the feedback form, and we'll also be sending that out over email. So I know that we, at the very beginning, we weren't able to do our toast with our glass of water. And so I see Anya there and others. Let's get our glass of water out here and say, really, as Grandma Aggie taught us, thank you for this water. Please bless this water. And let's toast to our evening tonight. And I'm going to, with that, pass the mic back to Cynthia. Cynthia, are you there?
I am.
You're there. Hello. Pass it to you, my friend.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. We have so much to be grateful for. We have so many support people. We've had very special people here tonight. Thank you to our talented facilitator, Rihanna, and our guru tech master, Stephen. We have a couple behind the scenes people, Jennifer Zeitler, our webmaster, and our videographer, Wanda Borland. Our special guest, Belinda Brown, thank you, who led that beautiful water blessing. Thank you so much. And tonight's guest panelists, Francis Oyoung, Eugene Weir, and Sarah Mosser, thank you so much. Our conversation supporters were awesome. Thank you all, and all the individuals and organizations that have donated to keep the summit flowing. Thank you. We have 12 co-sponsoring organizations, and we really appreciate all of them. And most especially, we appreciate you, our participants. So let's just do one more toast. Let's toast to the water and to each other. Cheers. Thank you all.
Cheers to good health. Woohoo, and clean water. Thank you all. Have a good evening. Thank you for a really great water solution.
Fabulous.